This was late summer fall of 1997. We owned some recreational property in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in North Alabama, right along the Tennessee River, and still have it to this day, actually. Now it was that time of year where we'd head out there to clean up the trails and set tree stands. The air had just started to cool down a bit, and the underbrush was still thick from the summer growth. We'd usually make a weekend of it, bringing the truck loaded down with tools, chainsaw, and enough supplies to stay over if we needed to. Now my dad was on the tractor getting some food plots ready, and we were just following him around on the ATV. And anyhow, we got on the far side of the property and got pretty thirsty. It was hot work even with the cooler temperatures, so we decided to head back over to our cabin and grab some drinks, then come right back. Instead of cutting through the trails, we hit one of the two roads that ran through this little community. But these weren't paved or anything, just dirt and gravel roads that connected the few cabins and hunting camps scattered around the area. We figured it'd save us a good 10 minutes or so going that route instead. And off one of those roads was a dirt road called Cemetery Road that led to an active cemetery, which is still in use to this day, matter of fact. Now the road went into the cemetery and made a full loop around, so there was only one way in and out. Thick, fully wooded underbrush on both sides of the road and surrounding the whole cemetery. And you couldn't see more than 15 or 20 feet into the trees on either side. We had a trail that connected into that loop with a gate that led straight to our cabin, only about 400 to 500 yards away, just on the other side of a little ridge. We'd used that shortcut plenty of times before. Made it real convenient getting back and forth without having to go all the way around the main road. Now as we came around the curve to where the cemetery becomes visible, we saw a fellow sitting right at the point where the loop started. At this point we were about 100 yards away, maybe a little less. We slowed down considerably, trying to be cordial and polite since it's still an operating cemetery and all. We figured maybe it was just someone mourning a loved one or doing the decoration thing. Now it wasn't uncommon to see folks out there from time to time, especially on weekends. So we just wanted to pass by respectfully and not disturb anybody. But as we got closer and were about to pass by, we noticed it was a black man, or at least appeared to be. Didn't have much color to him, to be honest with you. Kind of grayish almost. But his features looked to be of African American descent. He was wearing faded overalls with no undershirt underneath, no shoes on his feet, and was sitting on a concrete block that was turned up edgeways. And as we passed him maybe 10 feet away, there was no emotion on his face whatsoever, just stared straight ahead like we weren't even there, so it struck us as odd right away. Then, after a while, we reached to the cabin and hopped off the ATV and ran inside to grab a couple of waters, left the ATV still running outside. We're talking about maybe 2 minutes had passed since the encounter, if that. My buddy was still sitting on the ATV when I came back out, and he asked me if I knew who that man was. I told him I had no idea, never seen him before in my life.
In a world where January is supposed to be boring, one staple of the holidays refuses to end. The Great...
But we were fixing to head back through that same way to get back to my dad. So I figured maybe we'd get another look, or he'd be gone by then. As we came back through, there wasn't the slightest evidence of him ever being there. And even the concrete block was gone. So at this point I was thinking something was definitely off. And so was my friend. We both kind of looked at each other with that what the hell expression. I thought maybe we'd pass him walking around the curve on Cemetery Road that wasn't yet visible from where we were. Figured he must have gotten up and headed out. But again, as we rode slowly down that road, there wasn't anything in sight. Then I remember that it was only one way in and out of there, so he couldn't have just disappeared like that. And also, this road is about 1.5 miles long off one of the main roads too. But but still I thought we might pass him eventually, that he had to be walking out somewhere. Well, that main road was also a no-outlet situation. It dead-ended into government-owned property that's highly gated and fenced off. Cemetery Road was about a half mile from that dead end. My dad was tending to a food plot very close to the main road. Couldn't have been more than 50 yards off it, so he would have heard or seen anyone passing by. When we pulled up on the ATV, I asked him straight away if he'd seen anyone come down the road in the last few minutes. He looked up from the tractor, wiped his brow, and said no, hadn't seen a soul. So we told him what happened, and he started just laughing at us. He thought we were pulling his leg or something, and said there hadn't been a car, truck, or anything come through the whole time he'd been out there. And to this day, there are only about 58 residents that live in nearly a 9-mile stretch, so it's not a very busy area at all. You notice when vehicles go by. That's the last we really ever spoke of it to my dad, but my friend and I just knew deep down it was some sort of ghost, or something we couldn't explain. We talked about it from time to time over the years, especially when we'd go back out there, and still never really came up with anything that made any sense. And why would someone take the block with them even if they went off into the woods? Those things weigh over 40 pounds apiece, so how would you even lug it through that thick underbrush anyhow? Now fast forward to the spring of 2005, and we lived about 30 minutes away from this land or the area where this event happened, for reference. We had an outbreak of severe storms late that evening. My dad was out of town on a business trip, and I was over at my cousin's house as the storms rolled through. We were hunkered down in the hallway, watching the weather on TV, lightning flashing constantly outside. My dad called me and asked if we could ride down to the cabin to check on it since he was stuck out of town. Told us to bring some chainsaws and tarps just in case a tree had fallen on it or whatever damage might have happened. We loaded everything we needed into the truck and got down there right around 9 p.m. It was dark, of course, and the power in the whole area was out. It was still raining pretty good as we were unlocking the gate to go into the driveway. And about that time, an SUV pulled in right behind us with its headlights on. We weren't expecting anybody else to be out there, especially not at that hour in those conditions. I figured it was someone lost or looking for an address, and as I walked up to the driver's side window, there sat a lady. She rolled her window down, eager to talk to someone. I asked her if I could help her with anything, and she asked me if we were the owners of this place. So I told her, yeah, we owned it. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, handed it to me, and told me to give her a call as soon as possible, under better circumstances. She explained she was some sort of investigative writer. I was a little taken aback. I mean, it seemed like an odd time and place for that conversation. She was working on a story about the area and wanted to interview my family about it. Anyway, she left after that, and I stuffed her card into my pocket. When I got back home, I emptied my pockets on the kitchen counter and left everything there. 2 days later, my dad got back from his trip and noticed the card sitting there. He asked me who it was from, and I told him what happened that night at the cabin. We decided to call her up, had a brief conversation on the phone, and she set up a time to swing by our house to do the interview. About a week later, she showed up at our place, just like she said she would. She asked us if we'd ever witnessed anything unusual on or around the property, and not thinking much about it at first, we both replied not really. Then, of course, it hit me and my dad about the same time, that day back in '97. I proceeded to tell her exactly what we saw that afternoon. She got this excited look on her face and said, "That's what I wanted to hear." So apparently she'd been conducting multiple interviews with several of the locals in the area. Some were willing to talk, and most were not. But she said she had at least 10 different people, or couples, that gave the exact same description as I did. She said through her research and searching headstones in the area, she believes it's a man by the name of Ezekiel, or Zeke for short. She found his gravesite in an old abandoned cemetery with less than 10 headstones total, but only his had any carved writing on it. She took pictures of it to show us. The stone was weathered and covered in moss, but you could still make out the words if you looked close enough. She believes he was a slave and belonged to a prominent and very large plantation that was in the area back in the 1800s, and he must have been of some importance or held a pretty high level of responsibility. The lady ended up publishing this book full of short stories from around the region, and she was kind enough to give us a signed copy when it was completed. I don't think it did very well commercially, maybe sold locally in a few bookstores around North Alabama. But through the years of moving around to different places, we cannot find that book anywhere and cannot remember the exact title for the life of us. Wish we still had it. Anyhow though, it was definitely real, which I've always thought was pretty cool.
Do you know Hobby Lobby has hundreds of incredible products on sale every single week? Just check out our weekly ad to discover unbelievable savings across the store and start shopping in-store or online at hobbylobby.com today.
A degree, but still no
Families earning six.
They say higher education is outdated.
I grew up on a farm, pretty much in the middle of nowhere in lovely West Virginia. The log cabin I grew up in was very old, and the land had so much history that photographers, historians, and others would sometimes find us and visit. Now we had about 245 acres of land in the Appalachian Mountains, most of it thick woods and rocky hollows. But my parents had only one rule. I was not to go to the deepest part of the forest, so I didn't. Not even my older brothers would venture that way hunting. There was just something about that place. The trees grew different there, darker and more twisted. Even the birds didn't sing much past a certain point. Dad never explained why it was off limits, and we never asked. Now, certain times of the year, my family would move our cattle to the field right behind our cabin, and I always thought this to be strange because for the most part, they stayed in the valley that our home overlooked. As I got older and more involved with the farm, I would notice how my dad would start getting nervous towards that time of year. He'd check the fences twice a day, sometimes 3 times, and he would start making preparations to move them closer to the house because he feared something in the woods. The dogs would pace the porch at night, whining low in their throats. Dad always did the move right before dusk, hustling the herd up the hill faster than usual. He'd count them obsessively once they were penned, then count them again at first light. Now, when I was about 10, I heard these strange sounds coming from outside my window. These windows were so thin, we had to put plastic and a big thick blanket over them to keep the cold out in winter. I heard the horses going wild in the field, and this screeching and screaming sound all at once. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. I instantly thought coyotes were after our horses, so I ran upstairs and woke up my father. He was already sitting up in bed, wide awake. He told me to go back to bed, not look out my windows, or go outside. His voice was firm in a way I'd never heard before. I could hear him and my brothers moving around upstairs after that. Now at the time I thought this very weird and couldn't sleep that night. I just thought of our poor horses, how scared they'd sounded. Even my pup was nervous. She stayed up all night with me, pressed against my side and trembling. Later, when the sun was up, my father and 4 of my brothers went out to the field, and I followed along even though Dad told me to stay inside. What we saw was terrifying to say the least. 2 horses were badly hurt, and the fence was destroyed in several places. The ground was churned up like something had thrashed around for hours, but there were no clear tracks leading anywhere. My father was very concerned and his face had gone pale. He was whispering to my brothers on what to do, checking over his shoulder like something might be watching. He told them to make sure our home was secure, in fear of whatever this was, and that it might try to get near our house. I never understood how any animal could have done the damage that I saw, or how it could try to approach our home. Dad made us all go inside, and wouldn't let anyone outside alone for weeks after that. Sometimes I swear I could hear something almost whispering in the fields to each other, or maybe even to me, as I sat by my window listening to them. The sounds were too deliberate to be wind. We moved away from the farm when I was in my late teens. Dad said it was for work, but I knew better. From what I hear, no one has ever bought the land or lived on it since. It just sits there, empty. Sometimes I wonder if those things are still out there, waiting in the deep woods. Now as a host, I think his dad already knew what he was dealing with. But what bothers me is this. If he knew everything, why didn't he build a stronger fence to keep it out? And why not add lights around the property? Or set up some kind of warning system? Or it's like he knew the fence wouldn't matter anyway. Like whatever was out there couldn't be stopped by something as simple as wood and wire.
Wawa's $5 Big Breakfast Deal gets you any sizzly, any coffee, and a hash brown for $5. Gotta have a Wawa.
This season, you've got places to go, people to see, and things to do. You may have already gotten vaccinated.
I live in southern Ohio, Appalachian Valley area, and this happened this year, 2025. I was working a late shift as a cashier at a truck stop off Route 35, and we get tons of people coming in and out all the time. From my register, I can see both entrance doors clear as day, and part of my job is keeping a mental tally of who comes in, when they leave, and how long they've been hanging around. So we get a sense for the regulars pretty quick, and can spot when something's off. That night, the place was steady, but not crazy busy. Maybe a dozen people scattered around, grabbing coffee or browsing the aisles. The fluorescent lights were doing that annoying flicker thing they always do after 10 p.m. Then 2 guys come in, one's a regular who always gets the same energy drink, and the other's just some random trucker passing through. Now these were the only 2 customers in the store until they checked out. They both paid and left, and the second guy was still outside at the pump getting his fuel when I turned back around to give him his receipt through the window. That's when I saw what I thought was a very dark-skinned black man standing right there in line behind where the trucker had been. I don't even know how I missed him come in. I rang him up at my register and he bought a large fountain drink. Filled it with mostly ice, I remember. Then he tried handing me this thick stack of crumpled Powerball tickets to play. Must have been 20 or 30 of them. So I told him that unfortunately the lottery machine was broken and had been down since that morning. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me. Then he stepped forward, and I swear he got taller somehow. Like he stretched up, and he growled and barked right in my face. He literally jumped at me like a jack-in-the-box, and his whole body had this weird recoil to it that didn't match his skinny, bone-sticking-out build at all. It was unnatural. Then he just locked eyes with me for what felt like forever. Had to be a good 10 seconds. Not blinking, not moving. Then suddenly, he was gone. He wasn't exactly running, but he sure as hell wasn't walking either. Just gone too fast. And right when he left, every light in the store flickered at once. The hair on my arms stood straight up. I just stood there frozen, couldn't even move for a minute. I couldn't understand why it terrified me so much, until I really thought back on his face and glanced out the window. He was still out there somewhere in the parking lot, staring back through the glass as he walked away. The only identifiable parts of his face were these yellow eyes with tiny black pupils, like a cat's or something worse, and his stark white teeth when he barked at me. And that's when it hit me like a freight truck. He never came into the store. I never saw him enter. He only left. And when I checked the security footage the next morning, when my manager came in, I went through it 3 times. The 2 customers came in, checked out. Then there's me turning around with the receipt, and suddenly I'm ringing someone up, but the door never opened. You can see me talking to empty air, reaching out like I'm taking money, handing back change. I put in my 2 weeks the following day. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. So my wife and I are vacating at a rental cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And last night we got back from a fun night of eating way too much southern food and playing some miniature golf, and then decided to enjoy the hot tub with some beverages before heading to bed. Now, this was around 22:30 or so. While we were in the tub talking and relaxing, we kept hearing these rocks hitting the cabin and trees around us. At first, we thought maybe it was acorns or something falling, but it kept happening like every few minutes. We tried shining our phone flashlights into the woods, but couldn't see anything. So we quieted down for a bit, and the rocks stopped coming completely. And we actually saw one of them, maybe an inch in length or so, but hard to tell in the dark. Now, when we started talking again, the rocks started getting thrown again, almost like whatever it was wanted us to shut up. That's when it got weird for us, and my wife grabbed my arm, and we just looked at each other like, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" We tried the quiet thing again to test it, and sure enough, silence from the woods. While there are cabins to the left and right of our cabin and behind our cabin, there is no cabin directly below us. Also, the ground slopes very sharply down into a wooded draw, so it's not like someone could just walk up easily. There are some nighttime landscape lights directly below the cabin that allow us to see a little bit into the woods, but not far at all, maybe 15 feet or so before it's just pitch black. We quieted down again after the second rock throwing spell, and the rocks stopped coming. We sat there in complete silence for probably a minute or 2. My wife whispered that maybe we should just go inside, and I didn't argue. Then we heard something big move in the underbrush, like someone or something was repositioning themselves down there. It wasn't a small animal. Whatever moved had some weight to it. I then started to whistle a bit in a pattern, just to see what would happen, and sure enough, the rocks started getting thrown again, almost immediately. So I said a bit loudly into the darkness that we were going to bed, and not to stay up all night throwing rocks at our cabin. We weren't really scared or worried at that point, but I still brought the can of bear spray and our sidearms next to the bed, just in case. My wife thought I was being paranoid, but better safe than sorry when you're out in the middle of nowhere like this. The ravine is a good 20 to 30 feet below the top deck, if not farther, and it's steep as hell. The cabins next to us are not being rented right now, and we are the only ones around in this bit of the neighborhood. Could it have been kids or someone messing with us? Sure, I guess. But they kept very quiet and didn't move around much until that one repositioning move. And we were out there a good 40 minutes total. I didn't hear any giggling, whispering, or any footsteps crunching around. Whoever or whatever it was had serious patience and stayed completely still, except for throwing. And that's what's bugging me the most, honestly.
You are trapped by a meaningless duty that was never yours. This happened maybe 8 or 9 months after I moved into my first house. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of college with a decent job. All you need to know about the house is that it had a very spacious basement that I mostly used for storage. The previous owners had partitioned it into these separate rooms using plywood and exposed framing. There was the main area at the bottom of the stairs, then a laundry section, then what I think was supposed to be a workshop, and then this weird back room that was mostly just storage. It had kind of a maze-like quality to it. You couldn't see the entire basement from any single vantage point, which I remember thinking was kind of cool when I first toured the place. Anyway, it was a weeknight. I needed to go downstairs to do laundry, which was the only time I ever really went down there. The basement lights were already on, which I thought was weird, but I didn't dwell on it for whatever reason. I'd been down there a few days earlier, so I figured I just forgot to turn them off. The space was dim even with the lights. I hadn't bothered changing the old yellow incandescents that had been there when I moved in. I started walking down the stairs, and things escalated so abruptly that I couldn't react quick enough. I made it to the bottom of the stairs and started walking toward the laundry area when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. I turned my head instinctively and locked eyes with a man who was crouching behind one of the folding tables that I had set up near the far corner. It was so unsettling that I almost dropped the basket. My brain refused to register what I was seeing. There was literally a stranger hiding in my basement. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at this intruder who was now staring back at me, and it was not a pleasant stare. He looked like he had just crawled out of a sewer or something, and then he stood up and ran. Not at me though, further into the basement toward the partitioned rooms in the back. That snapped me out of my fear-induced haze, and I started moving backwards toward the basement stairs. But I must have wasted too much time, because before I could reach the stairs, all the lights in the basement went out. Until that moment, I had never been down there with the lights off. I hadn't anticipated how dark it would be. It was fully pitch black down there, complete and utter darkness. I mistakenly assumed I knew my own house, so I kept moving toward the stairs, but I must have misjudged something, because I tripped and fell to the floor. By the time I got up, I was completely disoriented. The chaos and fear of the situation was overwhelming my brain, and I couldn't think. My phone was sitting on the counter upstairs, so it's not like I could just reach in my pocket and turn on the flashlight. I started screaming like a lunatic, thinking that might scare off whoever had broken into my house. But actually, that strategy must have energized them, because I started hearing screaming coming from the other side of the basement. It was terrifying. I was screaming into the darkness, trying to seem like I was crazy, and someone on the other side of the room was doing the same exact thing, and his screaming was much more intimidating than mine. He legitimately sounded like a murderer. I stopped screaming, and he followed suit. I started navigating around the basement purely by touch. I had no other choice, and I started hearing movement behind me. He must have been doing the same. The sounds were getting closer, and amidst the horror of everything, I couldn't help but get the sense that he knew my own basement better than I did. I knew I was getting closer to the stairs, but that basement is massive. I started hearing breathing coming from somewhere behind me, and I genuinely thought he was going to catch me. After what felt like an eternity, I felt the wooden base of the staircase. I grabbed the railing and started running up the stairs, but before I could even hit the second step, something grabbed my ankle and I lost my grip. My head struck the railing and I fell all the way down to the basement floor. I still couldn't see the guy, but he was dragging me away from the stairs with what genuinely felt like inhuman strength. I kicked and thrashed my legs with all my might and miraculously connected with something. The strike was just strong enough for him to lose his grip, and I twisted and twisted until I escaped his grasp. I started running back towards the stairs in the dark, and he started screaming again, but I found them before he could catch me. I made it to the top in the dark, burst through the door, and slammed it shut behind me. The nightmare was far from over, though. That door doesn't have a lock, so I had no choice but to press my weight against it and hope I was strong enough to keep him out. Just as I suspected, I heard footsteps pounding up the basement stairs mere seconds later, followed by a huge crash against the door. The door swung open for a terrifying second, and it took everything in my power to push it closed. The first impact must have emboldened him because he started repeatedly slamming into the door. I yanked off my socks and pushed against the door, knowing my life depended on it. I have no idea how he did make it through, but he eventually gave up. I heard footsteps crashing back down the basement stairs, and I immediately seized the opportunity to grab my phone. I ran over to the counter, grabbed it, and ran back to the basement door. With my back pressed against the door again, I called the police. When they finally arrived, that guy was gone. I kind of had a feeling. One of the basement windows had been forced open from the outside, and it didn't take a genius to figure out what happened. There was nothing missing or stolen, so one of the officers suggested that the intruder was probably using my basement as a place to live or hide. That hadn't crossed my mind, but it was somehow a worse thought than him simply wanting to rob the place. The other reason the police arrived at that theory was that the intruder somehow knew where the light switch was, which wasn't in the most obvious place. It made sense. I ended up moving out about 4 months after the incident. Thinking about this again has confirmed something for me. That guy was fully prepared to kill me that night, and if things had played out differently, he just might have. This happened when I was 14. I'm in my 30s now, so we're talking close to 20 years ago at this point. My parents had to drive out of state for a wedding and didn't want to leave me alone, despite the fact that I was staying at home alone age. So the original plan was for my older sister to stay with me for the weekend. She was already in college at the time, but she only lived an hour away. As soon as my parents left, though, she texted me and told me she had some party to go to and wasn't going to come. I didn't really care. I didn't even bother telling my parents about it, partly because I didn't want to stress them out and partly because I didn't want them to find someone else to watch me. It wasn't like the house was in some sketchy area either. It was a typical 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The place mostly consisted of families too, so I knew I'd be fine. The evening was completely uneventful. I played Halo for like 6 hours, something I'd ordinarily never get to do. It wasn't until just after midnight where things started getting weird. I was still lounging on the couch when I heard this faint tapping sound. The sound came from somewhere in the backyard, and I immediately assumed it was something hitting the siding of the house. That's honestly what it sounded like, so I wasn't too concerned. A few minutes later, though, I heard it again. The sound was nearly identical, which gave me the impression that it was a tree branch hitting the same spot on the house. But then the tapping migrated, like whatever was making it was moving along the side of the house. That's when I knew something was wrong. The sound was far too intentional to not be made by something sentient. I muted the TV and froze. I didn't want to move. I just sat there listening, the way anyone would. But now there was just silence. After maybe a minute, I convinced myself that it had just been a scuttling animal or the wind, and I turned the TV back on. 20 minutes later, there was a new noise, one that made me a lot more concerned. It was another tapping sound. But this time, it sounded like it was coming from below me, from the basement. The living room was directly above the basement, so it had to be coming from there. It was an unfinished basement with a little kitchenette in the corner, so it wasn't crazy to imagine a critter rummaging around in there. I muted the TV again, this time getting up off the couch. I was dreading it, but I had to check. I had to at least assure myself that nothing was wrong. The basement had several windows that led directly to the outdoors, so in all likelihood, the raccoon or stray cat that had been making the first noise was now knocking against one of those windows for whatever reason. I tried to convince myself I wasn't freaking out and walked over to the basement door. I opened it and stood at the top of the stairs, looking down into the darkness. The tapping noise was louder now, happening every few seconds or so. I don't know why I did this, but I called out hello into the nothingness. The tapping stopped immediately. That's when I started feeling really uneasy, because if it had just been an animal, it probably wouldn't have reacted to my voice like that. If I could just turn on the lights, I'd get a much clearer view of everything. But the light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, and there was a 0% chance I was going down there. So instead, I swung the door closed until it was only open a crack, and stuck my hand through. I pointed my phone over to where I knew the window was. Then I closed my eyes and recorded a video with the flash on for a few seconds. Then I immediately shut the door and locked it. I took a deep breath and pulled up the video. It was pretty grainy, but it took me all of 1 second to realize there was a figure standing underneath one of the windows, on the inside of the house. I screamed. I couldn't control myself, and I ran to my room. I locked the door and immediately called my dad, who called the police for me. I was still on the phone with my parents when I started hearing repeated banging on the basement door. That guy was trying to break into the finished part of our house. And then, after the 5th or 6th bang or so, there was silence again, and then the police showed up. They searched the basement, but that guy had escaped through the window. The officers were actually nice enough to search our yard, but that guy was long gone. There was a bunch of stuff missing from the basement. Like I said before, it wasn't finished, but that didn't mean my parents left it empty. I can't remember everything that had been stolen, but the scariest thing by far was this. When the police inspected the kitchenette, they found the biggest knife in the rack missing. It was a terrifying thought. If it weren't for the video on my phone, I don't think the police would have taken things as seriously as they did. But of course, nothing ever came of it, and this was almost 20 years ago now. I have no idea what happened to that old phone. It's probably buried in a box of junk in my parents' house somewhere, if it even still exists. If I ever find it and the thing still turns on, I'll submit the footage. This happened when I was 16, 4 years ago now. I grew up in this big suburban house that my parents bought before I was born. It's one of those places that looks normal from the outside, but has all these weird quirks once you're inside. The biggest quirk by far is the basement. It's easily the largest room in the house. My parents finished it years ago and turned it into this casual hangout space with a sectional couch, a decent TV, and a couple of storage rooms in the back. You'd think a space like that would get a lot of use, but my parents are the type who prefer the living room upstairs. So basically, the basement is essentially mine. The other thing you need to know about is my cat. His name is Rocky, and he's one of those annoyingly friendly cats that constantly needs attention. Because of that, my parents put him in the basement every night before they go to sleep so he doesn't bother them. Now here's where things get a little sketchy, and I'm just going to be honest about it because there's no point in pretending otherwise. The basement has this interior door that connects directly to the garage. It's technically supposed to be a convenience thing for bringing in groceries or whatever, but for me, it was a convenience thing for sneaking people in. Anyway, it was a Friday night when this went down. I remember that specifically because I had invited this girl Madeline over, which I wouldn't have done on a school night. I also remember assuming Rocky was already down there. It wasn't a conscious thought, more so an implied assumption. It was past the time when my parents usually put him down there, so I figured he was asleep somewhere in the back, as per usual. That's why I didn't freak out when I heard a noise from one of the storage rooms. It was this faint rustling sound, like something moving around in the boxes. To be completely honest, I feel like I was justified in keeping my cool because it sounded like the exact sound an energetic cat might make. Madeline obviously tensed up a little, but I explained to her that it was just my cat, and then we went back to pretending to watch whatever was on the TV. But the noises kept happening. Not constantly, but every few minutes there'd be another rustle or a soft thud. Each time, Madeline would give me a worried look, and I'd have to assure her that he was just a very active cat and liked to climb on things. Which was true, he did like to climb on things. I was still 100% calm, right up until I heard scratching coming from the door at the top of the basement stairs. The door that led to the main part of the house. I instantly knew what I was hearing. It was Rocky scratching at the door to get into the basement, meaning he wasn't already down there with us, which also meant that whatever noises I'd been hearing for the past half hour were not him. I didn't say anything right away, partly because I didn't want to scare Madeline, and partly because I didn't know whether I believed what I was hearing. But before I could react, Madeline, who was still sitting right next to me, started screaming like she was being stabbed. I whipped my head around and realized she was pointing behind me, toward the back of the basement. I turned my head a little further and literally froze in fear. There was a foam football rolling across the floor, clearly having just been thrown out of the storage room. There was someone in there. I didn't see anyone. The back of the basement was too dark, but there was no other explanation. Someone was back there. Someone had been back there the whole time. Without thinking, I grabbed Madeline's arm and practically dragged her up the stairs. As soon as we made it up, I slammed the door behind us, careful not to let Rocky down there. Things got really chaotic after that. Madeline was crying, which was the first issue, but I was also shaking. Until that moment, I didn't even know I could get that scared. My parents eventually realized what was going on and called the police, who showed up a few minutes later. I stood on the back deck and watched the garage the entire time to make sure the intruder didn't slip out from there. Here's where things got weird, though. The police ended up searching the entire basement, including the garage, but didn't find anyone. There were also no signs of forced entry, and all the basement windows were locked from the inside. One of the officers suggested the intruder must have slipped out through the garage before they arrived, but I know that's not possible. I was watching it the entire time. I would have seen them. But after searching the house, there was nothing else that the police could do. Of course, my parents also thought the intruder had slipped away without me realizing it, and I could tell they were upset. My dad especially, but I don't care what they think. I'm 100% certain that no one escaped through the garage. There's only one path from the garage to the outdoors, and I had my eyes on it the entire time. My family never got a resolution to all of this, and I still have no explanation for everything that happened. I think every kid is afraid of basements. Let's face it, they're scary places. Even as an adult now who lives alone, I sometimes find myself a little uncomfortable going down to the basement to do laundry at night. At least I feel that way going up the stairs as I leave. But as a kid, I was terrified of the basement in my family house. Ironically, all our video game consoles were down there since it was the only other TV in the house besides the living room and my parents' room. I believe this happened when I was 9 because I remember being in elementary school, but one of my last years. On the weekends, I liked to stay up playing video games in the basement. One of my old favorites was Driver 2 on the PS1. For whatever reason, I could never beat the game, and I'd spend countless nights trying to do so. Well, it was one of those nights I was down there playing. I usually didn't like being up too late because the second my parents went to sleep, I'd be too scared to be down in the basement. Just the idea of my mom or dad watching TV upstairs was enough to make me feel somewhat safe, knowing they were a quick run up the stairs away. Similar to my current house today, my old family home had the laundry/boiler room in the basement. That room terrified me because it was pitch black at all hours of the day due to there being absolutely no windows. Also, weird sounds always came from in there, as to be expected I guess since it's a boiler room. There were definitely a handful of times where I stopped my game to listen when I thought I heard an unusual sound come from in there, even with the door closed. On this particular night, I did in fact hear an unusual sound, and it started with the sound of the laundry room door creaking open. This obviously was enough to make me pause my game and frighten me. There was an uncomfortable silence in the basement for a second, and it was then followed by what I can only describe as the sound of a woman moaning or groaning in an almost ghost-like way. But it sounded like my mom's voice. In fact, I knew it was. I started laughing, and I'm sure I said something like, "Nice try, Mom," knowing she was trying to scare me, which, side note, looking back, even as a kid, I should have realized something was wrong, considering my mom has never been a goofy person that would pull this kind of prank. But I walked over to the laundry room with a little more confidence now, and as I was in front of the open doorway leading into the darkness, the groans had stopped by now. I looked straight into the pitch-black room ahead, and as I inched closer, the outline of a person standing in there became visible. "Mom?" I said, now with less confidence. When I got just close enough, I made the judgment that it was not my mom. I started screaming as I ran up the stairs to the living room, and my horrific judgment was right.
Adobe Creative Cloud is designed to be almost like a playground. It's a collection of applications.
There was my mom in the living room with my dad. At this point, they were both already standing up, responding to my screams. I yelled, "There's a woman in the laundry room," and I remember they looked at each other, and then both ran down to the basement, slamming the door shut behind them. I sat confused, scared, but slightly relieved knowing my parents were down there now. I remember being in the living room for a long time before my mom came upstairs and told me to go to my room and go to sleep. I didn't ask questions and obeyed. I had a hard time falling asleep that night, I'm sure, but I remember the next morning. My parents told me they had one of their friends prank me to scare me, and they treated it like it was one big joke. I don't fully remember how much I believed it or not, but I for sure asked them to elaborate on who it was. My mom said it was one of her friends from out of state who was visiting. I didn't question it, but as I got older, the name Debbie was seemingly accidentally dropped by my parents a few times, and whenever I'd ask who Debbie is, they'd have a different response. When I was maybe 14, I thought back one day on this night and decided to do a deep dive. I found a family tree type of website and admittedly stole my dad's credit card from his wallet momentarily to pay for the service, then slipped it back in the wallet. I inputted both my parents' names. Among a few familiar names and a bunch of names I didn't recognize, what instantly stood out was that my mom had a sister named Debbie. So I googled Debbie followed by my mom's maiden name, and up popped an obituary. She was dead. I ran to grab my parents to show them what I found on the screen, and I demanded they explain. I remember their shocked and nervous looks on their faces still. "Tell him," my dad said to my mom. My mom then dropped the bomb on me. I had a very mentally unstable aunt who harmed a lot of people, and it was for the best that she was always kept away from me growing up. Debbie had allegedly broken into or snuck into the house without my parents knowing. I had so many questions and demanded answers, but there was little more that they would tell me. They swore they had my best interests at heart. Over the years, I'd occasionally bring it up, but they'd always shut it down and tell me to drop it. I never learned what they meant by "she harmed a lot of people," but I have some theories. It doesn't really do me any good dwelling on it, though. It makes me kind of nervous to think about it. What else were my parents hiding? What happened to Debbie? Why was she in the basement? I wondered a few times if my parents were hiding her down there after she had done something horrible, but that wouldn't make much sense because I don't think they'd let me down there in the basement then. I guess some questions are better left unanswered.
With you. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what's more terrifying. Some unexplained creature taking someone into the woods forever. Or some unexplained thing taking a loved one into the woods, but letting them go, only for them to never be the same again. This story, titled The Holler, from NJJ, describes a very disturbing encounter in the Appalachian Mountains when two brothers decide to meet up to go hunting. NJJ has let me know that he believes this to be an encounter with the Wampus Cat. But whatever it truly was, one thing is certain. Something took his brother in the Appalachian Mountains, but it let him go. My brother Daniel had been living in the mountains for 2 years when he sent me the picture of the claw marks. 8 feet up a tulip poplar, gouged deep into the bark. 5 parallel grooves that looked like someone had gone at the tree with a garden rake. Except the spacing was particularly wide, and the cuts went down to the pale wood underneath.
"Bear, probably,"
he texted.
"Maybe a cat. They've been making a comeback, you know. Mountain lions."
I was sitting in my truck outside a distribution warehouse in Dayton, eating a gas station sandwich that tasted like the plastic it came wrapped in. I'd been driving forklifts for the same company since I was 19, and lunch break was the only part of the shift I looked forward to anymore. It was November. The sky was the color of old dishwater, and I'd been putting off this trip for 6 months.
"You keep saying you're gonna come down,"
Daniel wrote.
"Starting to think you're scared."
I wasn't scared. I just didn't see the point of driving 9 hours to sit in the woods and not shoot a thing, which is what hunting with Daniel always amounted to. He talked too much, he moved too loud, and he got bored after the first hour. When we were kids, he'd start throwing rocks at squirrels just to watch them scatter, and it drove our father crazy. But he kept asking, and the pictures kept coming. He told me about the whispering outside his front door at 3 a.m. One time he found a dead rabbit on his porch, arranged in a way he couldn't quite describe, but that made his skin crawl. On one occasion, he heard something large moving through the hollow behind his house after dark, crashing through the brush without any apparent concern for stealth. Daniel treated it all like entertainment. Like living in a haunted house was just another adventure for a guy who'd spent his 20s bouncing between startup jobs, ashram retreats, and one disastrous attempt at day trading crypto.
Fine.
I texted back.
Weekend after Thanksgiving. I'll bring the bourbon. Yeah, bring the good stuff. None of that bottom shelf bullcrap you drink,
he replied. The drive from Dayton to Daniel's place in eastern Kentucky took 11 hours with stops. I left before dawn on a Friday. The roads were empty and glazed with frost, and by the time I hit the West Virginia line, the sun was up and weak behind a ceiling of gray cloud that looked like it went all the way to heaven. I stopped for gas outside Charleston. The station was one of those old independent places with 2 pumps and a convenience store that sold live bait, chewing tobacco, lottery tickets. A hand-lettered sign in the window advertised night crawlers and a psychic reading special, 2 for 1. I filled the tank and went inside for coffee. The woman behind the counter was maybe 70, with white hair pulled back tight. Her skin looked like a dried-up apple. She watched me pour my coffee without blinking. When I brought it to the register, she raised an eyebrow at me, then said, "Heading into the mountains?" "Yes, ma'am." "Family?" My brother. He's got a place outside Belfry." She blinked. "The Odom House, on the ridge," she said. I hadn't told her Daniel's name, or the name of the property. Small towns, I guessed, because she was right. Maybe word travels. "Yeah, that's the one." She rang up my coffee, her fingers very slow on the keys, painfully slow. "You be careful on them roads. Storm coming in tomorrow, snow up high, rain down low." She handed me my change without meeting my eyes. "Be careful in general." I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. Instead, she turned away, straightening cigarette packets behind the counter, like I'd already left. The coffee tasted burnt. I drank it anyway. I drove deeper into Kentucky. The interstate gave way to state highways, and those gave way to country roads. And before long, those became 2-lane blacktop that wound through hollows and over ridges, with names like Greasy Creek or Frozen Branch or even Marrowbone. The GPS signal stuttered and died, somewhere around the Pike County line. I was navigating by the directions Daniel had texted me, landmarks instead of street names. He said,
"Left at the church with the blue roof, right at the barn that looks like it's about to fall over. Keep on going until you see the dead oak tree that got hit by lightning."
I was about 20 minutes out from his place when I came around a curve and saw the truck pulled off on the shoulder. It was an old Ford, primer gray, with a dented tailgate and a rebel flag sticker peeling off the back window. A man was crouched at the edge of the road, doing something with his hands. I slowed down, and he looked up at me, squinting against my headlights, even though it was in the middle of the afternoon. He appeared to be pulling something off the road. Roadkill. The dark shape of it, his hands buried in fur. I pulled over behind him, because that's what you do out here, and I got out of my truck. "You need some help?" The man straightened up. He was younger than I'd thought, maybe 40, with a lean-looking face. He either didn't eat enough, or he drank too much. Couldn't tell. His hands were wet with blood, dark in the gray light. "Just getting this off the road," he said. His voice had that flat mountain accent, the vowels stretched thin. "I don't like leaving 'em to get run over twice." I walked closer and looked at what he was dragging. It was a deer, or it used to be a deer. A doe from the size of it, though it was hard to tell because of what had been done to it. The belly was torn open from sternum to pelvis. The organs had spilled out into a wet pile on the asphalt. That wasn't unusual for roadkill. But what was unusual was the rest of it. The thing's head had been twisted around half a dozen times. Not broken, but twisted. Looked like someone had grabbed it by the snout and just kept turning until the spine gave way. The eyes were open, filmed over with white, staring back along the body toward the ruined belly. The mouth was open too, tongue lolling out at an angle that made it look like the animal was laughing at some joke. "Christ," I said. The man glanced at me, then back to the deer. "Yep, ain't seen one this bad in a while." "What hit it?" He grabbed the deer by its hind legs and dragged it off the road into the brown grass of the ditch. It left a smear of red and something darker on the asphalt. When he was done, he stood there looking down at it, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Nothing hit it," he said finally. "Wasn't hit." "What do you mean?" He looked at me again. His eyes were the color of old ice. "I mean, there ain't no tire marks, no glass. Nothing hit this deer." He shook his head real slow. "Something caught it. Something that likes to, play with its food." He gestured towards it. I looked at the deer again, at that twisted neck and splayed organs. The way the legs were positioned, like it had been trying to run even after it had died. The man was right. That wasn't impact damage. It was more like a sculpture. What kind of animal kills like that? The man began to walk back to his truck. "You heading up to the Odom place?" he said. "Your brother, right? The one from up north?" I didn't ask how he knew. Probably the same way the woman at the gas station knew. Probably. Small towns. "Yeah." He opened his truck door, then paused. He looked back at me over his shoulder. "You tell him Red Williamson says hey, and tell him—" He stopped, working his jaw like he was chewing on something that he didn't plan to swallow. "Well, tell him to keep his doors locked. All of them. Even the ones he thinks don't matter." He got in his truck and drove away. I stood there on the shoulder of the road, the smell of that blood and something else musky and sour heavy in the cold air. After a minute, I got back in my own truck and kept on driving. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if anything was watching me go, or coming back for its kill.
Most people don't know that you can get a domain from Squarespace. Not just a website. But you're not most people, because now you know you can get a domain from Squarespace. Something like velvetchords.com for your music studio. Or kidchords.com for your middle school band camp. Whatever your dream, Squarespace is how you make it happen, all under one roof.
Daniel's house sat on a ridge overlooking a hollow so deep, the bottom of it was already in shadow, even though the sunset was still an hour away. His house itself was old. Victorian, he told me. Built by some coal money family back when coal money meant something. It had a wraparound porch and tall windows, and a roof that peaked in 3 places like a row of crooked teeth. He'd bought it cheap. Of course he had. Nobody wanted to live this far from anything, in a house that had been empty for the better part of a decade, on a ridge that the locals apparently called the Odom Place. Daniel was waiting on the porch when I pulled up. He had apparently grown a beard since I'd last seen him, a thick red thing that made him look like a lumberjack or a craft brewery owner. Flannel, work boots, beer in his hand, the picture of rustic contentment. "You actually came," he said as I got out of the truck. "Guess I owe Jenny $20. Who's Jenny?" "Lady at the hardware store. She bet me you'd chicken out. Nice to know you have faith in me." He grinned and came down the porch steps to help me with my bags. We did the half-hug thing that brothers do, where you're close enough to smell each other but not close enough to admit you missed anyone. Long drive? He asked. Long enough. I grabbed my duffel and my gun case from the back seat. Met one of your neighbors along the way. Think it was Red Williamson. He said hey. Daniel's grin flickered. Just for a second, barely there, but I caught it. Red's good people. A little intense, but good people. He was pulling a dead deer off the road, discussing what killed it. Well, what killed it? Well, that's what I'm asking you now. Daniel took my duffel and started up the porch steps. Oh, probably a cat. Mountain lions are coming back, like I said. Or maybe a bear. They do weird stuff sometimes. Do bears twist deer's head around backwards several times in a row? He stopped at the door and stared at me. The grin was gone now. His expression was one of disgust. Is that what it did? Yeah, I saw it. He was quiet for a second, then he pushed open the door and stepped inside. Never mind that. Come on in, I'll give you the tour. After that, you can tell me all about it over whiskey. The inside of that house was nicer than I'd expected. Daniel had put some work into it. New floors, fresh paint, modern fixtures, though admittedly those looked out of place against the old bones of the building. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The living room had a leather couch and a TV the size of a small car. He'd made it comfortable, livable. But there were things he hadn't touched up. There was a staircase at the back of the house, which led up to a second-floor landing where the wallpaper was still peeling. The light fixtures were still old brass, and the air was thick with that stale smell of rooms that never get opened. There was a door under the stairs that he had padlocked shut. The windows in the back looked out onto the hollow, their curtains drawn tight, even in the middle of the day. Guest rooms upstairs, Daniel said, leading me past the padlocked door without comment. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Water takes a minute to get hot. What's behind that door? Basement. I don't go down there. Why not? He shrugged. Foundation's bad. Whole thing floods when it rains. He started up the stairs, carrying my duffel. Come on, I'll show you where you're sleeping. The guest room was at the front of the house, overlooking the driveway and the dirt road, which led back down to the highway. The bed was a queen, the mattress still wrapped in plastic. A window seat looked out on the ridge across the hollow. In the fading light, I could see the tree line, black against gray sky, and nothing moved anywhere. Wow, not bad, I said. Told you. Daniel set my duffel on the bed. Get on settled, I'll start some dinner. He left. I stood at the window for a while, looking out over the mountains. The clouds were lower now, pressing down on the ridges like a hand pressing down on a chest. The woman at the gas station had been right about the storm. I could feel it coming in the way the air tasted, sort of metal-like. In the hollow below, something moved. Briefly, just a shadow there and gone, slipping between the trees at the edge of the dark. I waited for it to reappear, but it didn't. I unpacked my bag and went downstairs. Dinner was steaks, baked potatoes, a bottle of Blanton's I'd brought from home. We ate at the kitchen table, which was an old farmhouse thing Daniel had found at an estate sale, scarred and pitted, probably worth more than my truck, though. So, Daniel said, sawing into his steak. That deer. That deer. Well, Red showed you. Well, he made a point of it. Let me get a real good look. Daniel chewed, swallowed, took a sip of bourbon. Yeah, he does that. Thinks he's doing people a favor, warning them. What's he trying to warn people about? The weirdness, Daniel grinned. That's what I call it, the weirdness. This place is lousy with it. I told you about the whispering, right? And the thing in the hollow? Sure, I do remember that. It's better in person, trust me. He leaned back in his chair, bourbon glass balanced on his knee. So last week, I'm sitting on the back porch, middle of the night, can't sleep. I hear something come up out of the hollow. Something big, heavy. I can hear it breathing. Sounded like a dog that had been running too hard. And it just stands there maybe 30 feet from the porch, in the dark where I can't see it. This went on for like 20 minutes. Just the breathing. And then it leaves. And you just sat there? What do you want me to do, go chase it? You could have gone inside before something ate you. And missed the show? He shook his head. That's the thing you don't get. This stuff, it's not scary, it's interesting. I mean, when's the last time something interesting happened to you? I thought about my days. The job sites that all looked the same. The apartment with the leaky faucet I kept meaning to fix. And the girlfriend who left 2 years ago. Not to mention the silence she left behind. It's been a while, I admitted. Exactly. Daniel pointed at me with his fork. Out here, I never know what's going to happen next. That deer you saw, that's new. I've never seen one like that before. Means something's changing, something's different. He was smiling. There was nothing fake about it. He was genuinely excited. Don't you want to know what it is? I didn't answer. I decided to finish my bourbon. Hey, you remember when we were kids? Daniel said, pouring me another glass without asking. That summer at the lake house. You remember what we found in the woods? Do I? The dog. The dead dog. Except it wasn't just dead, was it? Looked like something had put it there, laid it out like it was sleeping. Except dogs don't sleep like that. Then we found another one, all in a line going deeper into the woods. Yeah, Dad made us stop looking for it. Daniel nearly choked. That's because Dad was scared. I remember his face when we told him. He knew something, never told us what, though. Daniel took another drink. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. How he grew up around here before he moved north. How he never wanted to come back. The way he'd get sometimes, this look on his face, when the news talked about something weird happening in Appalachia. He set down his glass. You know, I think he knew. Whatever's out here, I think he knew about it. That's a hell of a thing to say, Daniel. Well, it's a hell of a place. We looked at each other across the table, and for a moment it felt like we were kids again. Daniel with his wild ideas and me trying to keep up. Both of us standing at the edge of something we didn't understand. If this is your way of making me feel better about being here, I said, it's not working. Daniel laughed. A good sound. Come on, one more drink. Then I want to show you something. He poured us both another bourbon, then grabbed a couple of blankets from the couch. Porch, he said. We wrapped up tight to ward off the cold. The clouds had come in thick while we'd been eating, and the dark was absolute out here. No moon that night. The stars were absent too. Just the black shape of mountains against slightly less black sky. Give it a minute, Daniel said. Just listen. I listened. At first, there was nothing but the wind in the trees and the creak of the old house settling. But then, underneath it, I started to hear something. A rhythm like footsteps or maybe a heartbeat. There was something moving through the hollow below, heavy and slow. You hear it? Daniel whispered. I nodded. Every night, he said, around this time, Something walks to the hollow. I've never seen it yet, not clearly. But I've heard it, like this. And sometimes, if I wait long enough. He pointed toward the tree line at the edge of the property. There. I looked. At first I didn't see anything. But then, at the very edge of the dark, where the yard met the woods, something shifted. A shape, tall and hunched over, moving between the trees. It was there maybe 2 seconds. Then it was gone, swallowed by blackness. Jesus Christ, I said. I know. Daniel was grinning, actually grinning. Isn't it incredible? That's not the word I'd use. What is it? That's the beauty of it. I have no idea. We stayed up late after that, talking. Not about the weirdness, mostly. Our parents came up. Both of them were gone now. Dad from a heart attack 4 years ago. Mom from cancer. We talked about the girls we dated and the ones we let get away. I talked about the business I was trying to build on the side. Then we discussed the consulting work Daniel did that seemed to involve a lot of video calls and not much else. He was doing well for himself, better than I'd expected. The house was paid off and the car in the driveway was new. He'd put on weight, but in a healthy way. He didn't seem so stressed these days. Whatever he was doing out here, despite the creepy stuff, it was working for him. You ever get lonely out here? I asked. The bottle of Blanton's was nearly empty between the two of us. Sometimes, but there's people around, if I want them. Town's only 20 minutes away, and there's the neighbors. Like Red? Yep, like Red. And the Combs family down the road. And old Mrs. Hargis, who brings me pie every Sunday. She's convinced herself I'm gonna starve to death. He took a sip of bourbon. It's not lonely like you think. It's quiet. That's different. The wind picked up, moving through the trees with a sound like breath. From somewhere in the hollow, that rhythm continued, pacing and circling. That storm's coming in, I said. Tomorrow afternoon, probably. We'll want to get out early. For the hunt, right? Yeah, for the hunt. Daniel stood, stretched, and gathered the blankets. Get some sleep. I'll wake you up at 5. I stayed on the porch for a while after he went inside. I was listening, watching the tree line, but nothing else moved. I could still hear it down there in the dark, though. When I finally went to bed, I locked my door. Habit, probably. Or not. Dawn came. It was cold. Daniel made coffee and eggs. The two of us ate, standing up in the kitchen, our breath fogging in the air because the heat had not kicked on yet. By 6, we were in the truck, heading for a piece of public land that Daniel liked, which was about 40 minutes into the mountains. There's a hollow back in there, he said, driving with one hand and drinking coffee with the other. Opens up into a kind of bowl. Deer bed down in it during the day. If we get set up before full light, we might get lucky. When's the last time you actually shot something? Define shot. To hit something with a bullet, on purpose. He grinned. It's been a minute. The road wound up through the mountains. The forest here was old, oaks and tulip poplars that had been growing since before the Civil War, trunks thick and branches bare against gray sky. There were no houses or power lines, just road and trees and mountains going on forever. We parked at a pull-off near a creek and hiked in. The ground was frozen hard, our boots crunching through the frost on the dead leaves. Daniel led the way, moving quieter than I remembered him being capable of. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, and I watched his breath come in small white puffs. The forest here felt different than it did up north. It felt older, somehow. The trees were massive, trunks you couldn't get your arms around, roots bulging up through the earth like big old veins under your skin. Everything was gray and brown and utterly still. Barely any color and absolutely no movement. About half a mile in, Daniel stopped, pointing at something on the ground. There was a print in the mud. At first, I thought it was a deer track, but it was longer, and the rear portion dragged, like whatever made it had been walking on its heels. What made that? Daniel took a moment to observe. Don't know. Been seeing them around, though. Started about a month ago. You didn't mention that in your texts. Well, I didn't want to scare you off, he grinned. Come on, we're almost there. The hollow was maybe a mile in. We came to the edge of it, just as the sky started to lighten, finding positions behind a fallen oak that gave us a clear view of the bowl below. There was deer sign everywhere. Tracks in the mud and droppings scattered through the brush and rubs on the smaller trees where bucks had scraped off their velvet. Daniel settled in, checking his rifle, and I did the same. Now we wait, he whispered. So we waited. The forest woke up around us. Birds first, crows calling in the distance and smaller things flitting through the branches. A squirrel crawled from a hole in a nearby tree and sat on a branch watching us with black, suspicious eyes. The light grew, filtering down through bare canopy. But no deer. An hour passed, then another. The cold crept into my bones despite the layers I was wearing. Daniel was patient, though, more patient than I'd ever seen him, his eyes fixed on the hollow below. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker started up, the sound echoing through the trees like an intermittent, rapid heartbeat. Then it stopped. I didn't notice it at first. It was just one less sound in a forest full of sounds. But then I realized the crows went quiet too, followed by the other birds, and the squirrel had vanished back into its hole without me seeing it go. Something's off, I said finally. Daniel didn't look at me. What do you mean? Listen. He listened. I watched his face change as he heard what I'd been hearing for the past 20 minutes. Or rather, what I hadn't been hearing. The birds had stopped singing. Not gradually like they do when a predator moves through, but all at once, like a performance. The forest was absolutely still. It was just the two of us now, and the trees. That happens sometimes, Daniel said. But even he was quieter now. Does it? I asked. He didn't answer. He began to look at something in the hollow. I followed his gaze, and I saw it, too. At the far end of the bowl, maybe 200 yards away, something was standing at the edge of the trees. I assumed it was a deer. The shape was right, and the size was too. But then it moved, and I realized I was wrong. It was walking on 2 legs. The shape was hunched, moving through the underbrush with a strange lurching gait. It was too far away to see clearly, just a dark bulk against darkened trees. But there was something wrong with it. The limbs seemed bent wrong, and the way it walked was not natural. It stopped. Even at that distance, I could tell it was looking at us. Don't move, Daniel breathed. I didn't. Neither did he. We sat there behind our fallen oak, rifles in hand, watching the thing at the edge of the hollow watch us back. It stood there, then eventually turned and slipped into the trees. The forest swallowed it, and it was gone. We waited another 10 minutes before either of us spoke. What in the hell was that? I asked. Daniel was packing up his gear, his movements quick. Time to go. No, Daniel, what was that? He looked at me, but his eyes were bright. He wasn't afraid, I realized. He was excited. That's the weirdness. That's what I've been trying to tell you about. He shouldered his rifle and started back toward the truck. Come on, the storm's coming in faster than I thought. I followed him. As we hiked back through the silent forest, I kept checking over my shoulder, listening for steps that weren't ours. I couldn't stop thinking about that thing. What was it? Why did it watch us? Twice I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision. I think Daniel noticed something too. I could tell by the way he picked up his face. Neither of us mentioned it. We didn't have time to talk. We passed the strange tracks on the way back. There were more now, overlapping. Something had been pacing while we were in the hollow, circling. Daniel, I see them. They weren't there before. I know. We moved faster. By the time we got back to the truck, the first drops of rain were starting to fall. I looked back at the tree line as Daniel pulled out onto the road. For just a second, I thought I saw something standing there, half hidden in the shadows. Tall, still, watching. Then we were around the curve, and that part of the forest was gone. All I could see was the road ahead, the rain coming down, Daniel's hands tight on the steering wheel. The rain came in hard and sideways, driven by a wind that made the trees bend and groan like old men trying to stand up. By the time we got back to Daniel's place, visibility was down to maybe 50 feet, and the dirt road had turned to mud. The hollow below the house had disappeared entirely, blurred against curtains of water. Gonna be like this all night, Daniel said, pulling into the garage. Maybe tomorrow, too, from the looks of it. We stripped off our wet gear in the mudroom and left it dripping on the tile. Daniel disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a couple of beers, handing me one. So, you saw it, he said. I saw something. No, you saw it. He swigged his beer. How do you feel? I took a deep breath. I feel like I want to know what the heck I was looking at, Daniel. He grinned. Now you're getting it. We built a fire in the living room and settled in to wait out the storm. Daniel put on some old country music, like our father used to listen to. We talked and drank, watching rain lash against the windows. It felt almost normal, almost like the hunting trips we used to take with Dad, back before everything got complicated and we grew up. I found my attention going back to those windows, to the darkness beyond. I swear, under the sounds of the storm, I thought I heard footsteps. Around 8 o'clock, the power went out. Daniel had candles ready, which told me this wasn't uncommon. We lit them and kept drinking, the house filled with flickering shadows and the smell of beeswax. Happens all the time, Daniel said. Lines up here are crap. Power company takes forever to fix them, too. Great. Relax, generator kicks in if we need it, but the fire's enough for now. The fire was enough, and so was the beer and conversation. I started to relax, letting the tension release from my body, until I heard the footsteps on the porch. Heavy steps, moving from one end to the other, then stopping right outside the front door. I I could tell Daniel heard it. He went very rigid, his beer stopping halfway to his mouth. "That's not wind," I said. "No." We sat there listening. Soon the footsteps resumed, moving back the way they'd come. Then they stopped again. After that, there was a new sound. Fingernails dragging across wood. Has this happened before? Sometimes. Daniel set his beer down carefully. Not usually this close. The dragging sound stopped. For a long time, there was nothing but rain and wind and the crackling fire. Then, from somewhere outside, not the porch, but farther away, maybe near the hollow, was a strange call, a high-pitched wailing sound that rose and fell like a woman crying out. Except, no woman sounded like that. It sounded like something trying to imitate grief. The wail came again. It was closer. What is that? Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at the front door, like he expected it to burst open at any second. The excitement was gone from his face now. What I saw there instead was something I'd never seen on my brother before. Not in all the years I'd known him. Fear. The sounds continued for hours. Occasionally footsteps on the porch or circling the house, moving from window to window. Sometimes the wailing, rising and falling and never quite in the same place twice. Once there was a scratch at the back door that went on for 5 minutes straight. I couldn't help but wonder if whatever it was testing the wood, testing the door. Another time, something heavy pressed against one of the windows hard enough to make the glass creak and groan in the frame. And one time, just once, there was a voice. It came from the front porch, soft and muffled by the door. It was a woman's voice, calling someone's name, over and over, the way you would call for a lost child. The cadence to the voice was wrong. It had trouble pronouncing the vowels. Daniel's face went white as we listened. "Don't answer it," he said. "Whatever you do, don't talk to it." Luckily for him, I wasn't planning to. We kept the fire burning and the candles lit. Daniel got his rifle and I got mine, and we sat in the living room with our backs to the fireplace, watching the darkness shift and move beyond the windows. The old house groaned around us, settling and creaking, and every little sound made me flinch. "Has it ever been this bad?" I asked. "No, never like this." "What changed?" He shook his head. He had no idea, or he didn't want to say. Around midnight, the sounds stopped. We sat there waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. "Maybe it left," I said. "Maybe. We should check the doors, make sure everything's locked." Daniel agreed. We went through the house room by room, checking windows and doors, shining flashlights into corners. Everything was secure, everything was locked. The padlocked door to the basement was still padlocked, and the back door was still bolted. All the windows were still latched. We met back up in the living room. The fire had died down to a simple orange glow, and the candles were beginning to burn low. Daniel looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "Get some sleep, man," I said. "I'll stay up. Keep an eye and ear out." "I'm not tired." "Bullcrap, you look like death. Go to bed. I'll wake you up if anything happens." He argued, but eventually I convinced him. I heard him climb the stairs and heard his bedroom door close, then the creak of bed springs as he finally laid down. After that, it was quiet. I sat in the living room with my rifle across my knees, watching the fire, or rather the coals. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. Through the windows, I could see the clouds breaking up, a few stars even appearing in the gaps. The storm was passing. At some point, I must have dozed off. I didn't mean to. But the remaining warmth of the embers and the beer and the long day, all of it caught up to me. At some moment, I jerked awake to a sound that did not belong in this house. I was on my feet before I was fully conscious, rifle up. The candles had all burned out, and the fire was now just cold. I didn't know how long I'd been asleep. Daniel? No answer. The sound had come from the back of the house. The mudroom, I thought. Maybe the basement? I grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the sound, keeping my back to the wall, checking corners, like how my father had taught me when we used to hunt together. The house was quiet, except for my footsteps, my breathing, the creak of old floorboards. The mudroom was empty. Our wet gear was still where we'd left it, dripping on the tile. The back door remained bolted. But the door to the basement, the padlocked one under the stairs, stood wide open. The padlock, though, lay on the floor, still locked, like it had simply fallen through the hasp. The darkness in the stairwell was absolute. My flashlight beam died about 6 feet down, swallowed by blackness. I stood there for a while, just staring at that darkness. The smart thing to do was close the door and wake Daniel and get the heck out of the house. The smart thing to do was to not go down into a flooded basement in the middle of the night, with something moving around in the dark. But the thing was, I didn't hear the sound of the storm anymore, and I did not hear Daniel move or even breathe in his room upstairs. When I had called his name, only silence answered. So, I first ran to check where Daniel was, and he was not in his room. I ran back to the opening of the basement door, and I stared again. I did not want to go down there, but now I felt like I had to. I went down the stairs. The basement was not flooded. Daniel had lied about that, or had been lied to, or something had changed. The floor at the bottom of the stairs was dry concrete, cracked and stained, but dry. The air smelled like dirt, and underneath that, like wet and sour fur. It reminded me all too much of the smell of that roadkill. My flashlight carved a path through the dark. The basement was a lot bigger than I thought it would be, stretching back under the whole house, divided into rooms by old stone walls. I moved through slowly, checking every corner, calling Daniel's name, careful not to be too loud. There was no answer. All I got was more of that smell, getting stronger the deeper I went. The last room was at the back of the basement, directly under the rear porch. The door was old wood and swollen. I had to put my shoulder into it to get it to open. Daniel was inside. He was curled up on the floor in the corner, his arms wrapped around his knees and his face hidden. He was shaking. I could see the tremors running through him even in the dim light. Around him, covering the walls and ceiling, were marks, scratches, gouges, layered over each other like the work of decades. Daniel? He didn't respond. I crossed to him and crouched. I put my hand on his shoulder. His skin was cold as ice, even through his shirt. When I turned him towards me, his eyes were open but unfocused. The lights were on. No one was home. Daniel, it's your brother. We need to go. Come on. His mouth moved. but no sound came out. But behind me, the door swung shut. I spun around, holding up the rifle. The flashlight beam swept across the room but landed on nothing. Just a closed door and scratched walls. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered once, twice, and went out. The dark that came after was not normal. There was a weight or density to it. I swear to God, as I type this out now, I could feel that darkness touching my skin and filling my nose and mouth. It was hard to breathe. The smell was overwhelming now. That animal musk mixed with rot and decay. Something moved in the dark. Very, very close. I panicked. I fired the rifle. The muzzle flashed. The room lit for a deafening second, and in that second I saw it. A shape like a woman. Something that had once been a woman. The face was stretched and distorted. Rows of teeth that went on and on farther than they should have. Eyes yellow like a cat's. Its body was hunched. Its limbs were too long. It was covered in short, strange fur that seemed like a mix of human hair and cat hair. And that smell. God, that smell. That musk I'd caught on the roadkill, on the wind coming up from the hollow, magnified 100 times. The smell of something old and hungry. And that face was smiling. That was just a second of light. Then everything went back to complete darkness. Then, in an instant, something moved and hit me hard in the chest, enough to lift me off my feet. I must have hit my head hard, because I went out like a light. I woke up on the front porch sometime later. Dawn was breaking. I was lying on my back on the cold boards, my rifle beside me, and my chest aching like I'd been kicked by a racehorse. I lay there trying to remember how I even got there, trying to fit the pieces together while ignoring the massive pain in my body. But then I remembered Daniel. I shot straight up and nearly fell down again. My head was pounding and my vision swimming. Something was wrong with my ribs. It was like a grinding when I breathed. But I made it to my feet, and I made it through the front door. I went to the porch stairs, dreading going up them. Daniel! His bedroom door was open, and his bed was still empty, the sheets thrown back. I checked the bathroom, the guest room, every room on the second floor, but there was no sign of him. I went downstairs. The living room, the kitchen, the mudroom, nothing. The basement door, though, was closed now, and when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. It had been locked from the inside, which was something I didn't know it was capable of. I didn't know what to do. I ran back out to the porch, and that's when I saw him. He stood at the edge of the hollow, about 100 yards from the house. He was standing there looking down into the trees, shirtless, and even from this distance I saw the marks on his back. Dark lines that looked like scratches. I called his name. He didn't turn. I ran to him, my ribs screaming with every step. The ground was wet from the rain, thick and slick with mud underneath. When I finally made it to him, I put my hand on his shoulder and turned him towards me. His eyes were different. There was something behind them now that hadn't been there before, and the man who looked up at me was a stranger. Daniel, we need to get to a hospital. He shook his head. You're hurt, man. Those marks on your back. I'm fine. His voice was flat and colorless. He sounded like Daniel had been scooped out of his own body, leaving just a shell behind. You are not fine. Come on, I'll take you to a doctor. He let me lead him back to the house. I put a shirt on him and guided him to my truck. He sat in the passenger seat with his hands in his lap and his eyes fixed on seemingly nothing. The whole drive to the hospital, he spoke maybe 5 words total. At the hospital, they took him in and did x-rays and asked a bunch of questions I didn't have complete answers to. Was this an animal attack? An assault? I don't know. What would you tell them? I heard the nurses say something strange. That the wounds looked weeks old, not hours old, and they wondered if I'd been lying. Of course not. But what did that mean for Daniel? How were his wounds seemingly already healing? Could these nurses just be that incompetent? I wondered. A doctor came up to me, knowing that my answers had been incomplete, because he understood that I truly didn't know what happened to my brother. So he tried to answer for me. I'll be straight with you. This does look like an animal attack. This doctor was young, probably fresh out of residency. If I had to guess, maybe a bear or a mountain lion. Does it look like a bear or a mountain lion to you? I wasn't trying to be rude. I just really didn't know. But I think we both knew it didn't look like a bear or a cat. It looked like nothing that lived in those mountains, or nothing that should live out there. Daniel was discharged that afternoon with a prescription for antibiotics that he would never fill, and a referral to a psychiatrist that he never went to see. I drove him back to his house so he could pack a bag. He moved from room to room like a ghost, gathering clothes and toiletries, touching only what he had to. When he was done, he stood on the front porch and looked out at the hollow. "I'm not coming back here," he said. "I know. I don't blame you." He locked his eyes on mine. "I mean ever. I'm gonna sell this place. I'm going to move somewhere flat, somewhere with no trees." I didn't argue. I'd seen what was in that basement, and I'd seen what had been done to my brother. If he wanted to run, I understood. Running seemed like the only reasonable response. We drove to the airport in Charleston. He had enough points for a last-minute ticket to Dallas, where a college friend had a spare room. I waited with him at the gate, trying to think of something to say, something that would make any of this make sense. That thing. What do you think it was? Daniel glanced at me, and for a moment I saw my brother behind those changed eyes. The kid who used to build forts in the backyard, the teenager who taught me to drive stick, the man who had called me at 3 a.m. to tell me our father had died. I've heard locals call it something. A woman who's been changed into a cat. Call me crazy, all you want. Think I'm insane. That's okay. But whatever it was, it wanted me to see something. And in the dark, I saw it. And now I can never unsee it. I wanted so badly to ask what he saw. Wouldn't you? But I didn't dare ask. Didn't let myself broach that subject. His flight was boarding. He picked up his bag, and we hugged real and deep. He then walked toward the gate, and I watched him go. That was the last time I saw my brother in person. That was about 3 years ago. Daniel has since sold that house, like he said he would, to someone out of state, an investment group, I think. Not sure whatever happened to that property. After he moved to Dallas, his texting slowly came back more and more. And after a while, things began to feel normal again. But it's taken 3 years so far, and we're still not quite back to where we used to be. He tells me about his nightmares, about seeing the thing in the dark that she made him see. I've told him over and over again to go to a therapist, but he won't do it. Believe our story or don't. But I'm gonna do whatever it takes to help my brother on the road to recovery. I think this might be the first Wampus Cat story I've ever read, and honestly, it's far more chilling than the name says. But what really sticks with me, and creeps me out, even after the end of the story, was why didn't it kill Daniel? What was it she wanted him to see? Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can follow me on X at Dark Prevails, and find me narrating more scary stories on my other podcasts, like Tales from the Break Room, or Alone in the Woods. I also do a fun talk show, where I get to be more of myself, over on the YouTube channel, or Spotify/Apple Podcasts podcast, Night Watchers. If you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I'd love to read it. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
It's a new year, and it's time to get your picks in 26 with Bob's Discount Furniture. Shop Bob's for hot new styles featuring the latest technology, like stylish sleeper sectionals with immersive Bluetooth audio, relaxing reclining sofas with LED lighting, and fabulous fireplaces with mood lighting and speakers. All at Bob's everyday low prices, of course. So if you want to refresh your room for less, save big by stopping in or shopping online at Bob's Discount Furniture.